So good morning. My name is Jessica Prater. A couple months ago, I would call Beth Duffield a good friend of mine. Beth and I go to coffee pretty regularly. A couple months ago, Beth and I went out to lunch, and we talked for a little while, and we talked about some of the things that I was experiencing in the workplace as a consultant. And at the end of the conversation, she said, Jessica, I have this workforce event coming up. I want you to speak at it. I said, absolutely, love to help you out. I am passionate about serving our community, and so I'm absolutely happy to sign up. And at the time, she didn't tell me what topic she wanted me to speak on, which was fine. So about 3 weeks ago, Beth reached out and she said, Jessica, remember that lunch we were having and you were talking about how much job descriptions were driving you crazy and what you were seeing in the marketplace? I want you to speak on job descriptions. And I went, oh, nobody's going to come. But okay, I'll speak on job descriptions because I was telling Beth in the lunch that I've seen some trends with job descriptions as I am invited into employers and as I am doing organizational development work and as I'm doing training and development work, that I'm seeing some trends in job descriptions, and it's a little bit concerning for me as a consultant. And so what I want to come to you guys and talk to you guys about is my perspective as a consultant about best practices in job description. And I mentioned earlier, one of our attendees as they were coming in, I might be teaching myself out of some job opportunities. But I strongly believe that job descriptions are very important for every business. And so what I'm going to give you guys today is my perspective, how I come in and work with job descriptions. Primarily, I work with small and mid-sized businesses. I know a few of you guys represent some pretty large businesses in here. What I will tell you guys, I do know that sometimes there are some corporate standards that you have to adhere by in some of your larger businesses. But what I want to give you guys is some tools around job descriptions. I also want to briefly kind of follow up with the governor's comments this morning. Man, I was really energized after that. I have to tell you guys, I'm a West Tennessee native. I grew up in Jackson, Tennessee, which is midway between Memphis and Nashville. Very emotional announcement yesterday with Ford. I can tell you guys, I left the West Tennessee area because there were no job opportunities. Left the area that I grew up in. Particularly some of the watershed moments that have happened since I left. As many of you guys in manufacturing will know, there was a large tire manufacturer, Goodyear, in Union City that shut down in 2011. That impacted our rural communities significantly in West Tennessee. And when I graduated from MTSU in 2010, I had to make the hard decision, am I going to go back home or am I going to stay here? And listen guys, I love living in Middle Tennessee. I married a Middle Tennessee boy. I've actually gotten my family to migrate here, so now everybody lives here. But a part of me is sad thinking about there were not opportunities where I grew up to stay. And so I very much believe in the attraction that we have for companies right now, giving opportunities for businesses both in our metropolitan areas but also in our rural areas as well. So thank you guys for doing what you do, for allowing for employment in the communities that you live in. I'm very passionate about equipping our employers with the tools that they need to do the job that you do so well. Okay, so we're going to talk about job descriptions today, and I building a foundation for success. I consider job descriptions as foundational to all the fun things. I was talking with, and I'm a graduate of the MTSU IO Master's Program. For you guys that don't know, it's kind of our best secret here in Middle Tennessee. It's actually one of the top 5 programs in the United States. I was very blessed to be able to get in there as a local Tennessean. They don't let many local Tennesseans in, believe it or not. But I got to go through that program back in 2010. I was talking to one of the students in the program yesterday. She was asking me some of the things that I do in my consulting business. And I said, you know, we want to talk about the cool stuff all the time. We want to talk about succession planning. We want to talk about org charts. We want to talk about training and development. But nobody gets excited about job descriptions, right? And so let's talk about this piece. When I say the word job descriptions, and by the way, I'm a facilitator. That's a big part of what I do as well. So if you guys came in here to just hear a presentation, y'all came to the wrong room. Okay? So tell me about job descriptions. When I say the word job descriptions, what words do you guys associate with that? What comes up for y'all? Job descriptions.
Essential responsibilities.
Essential responsibilities.
Qualifications.
Okay.
Precepts.
Okay.
Requirements.
Okay. You said precepts?
Paysacks.
Oh, What did you say again? I'm sorry.
KSAPs, knowledge, skills, abilities,
Oh,
competencies.
got it. I call it KSAs, but yes, they're with you on that. So one more, somebody else said something as well?
I said requirements.
Requirements. Okay.
Minimum.
Minimum. Oh, I like that.
Other duties as assigned.
Other duties as assigned. Okay. We associate them very often with the legal piece. What we have to have if somebody's going to sue us, right? If we're worried about essential functions, accommodations, all of those things, okay? And here's what I'm going to tell you guys. There is certainly a place for the legal aspect of this. But what I'm going to talk to you guys today is not just the legal aspect, but the functional aspect. So many times we write job descriptions, we spend all this time, we make them, accurate and all these things, and then we put them on the shelf and they become the 10 Commandments that are etched in stone and we never look at them again, right? And so what I want to tell you guys and talk to you guys about is this idea of building job descriptions as a pillar of success for your business. And what I want to walk you guys through is some of the whys of why it's so important, but also the piece of the process that I go through as I'm looking at building or redoing job descriptions. So many times I go into small businesses, and many of them I'll say, where are your job descriptions? They go, well, we have some job ads that we post for. And I say, well, okay, that's what you're putting, going out into the community, but where is the thing that you use internally? And they're like, no, we have job ads, that's it, okay? And I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the importance of having both. And again, I realize that some of these things that I'm talking about is an investment, right? I am not also Pippi Longstocking up here and telling you guys that, you can do all the things all the time. I understand that many of you guys are working short-staffed. Many of you guys are trying to get as much as you can get done right now. Many times I'm going into small businesses where, they're saying, Jessica, we don't even have time to hire people. Why are we going to do job descriptions? And what I want to argue for you guys is this is an investment in the long-term strength of the jobs that you have, but the long-term strength of your organization. And so I really feel very strongly that building good job descriptions is critical for every organization. And by the way, of course I came today with a new piece of technology and my remote is not working. So if you see me looking at my phone, that's because I normally use my phone to advance the slides and it is just not working for me today. So I've got my notes right here as well. So forgive me, I'm not texting during this session. So let's talk about the employee life cycle. You guys have seen this before, attracting, onboarding, training, and retaining. What piece of this do you guys feel like the job descriptions fall under? What piece of this? What stage of this? All of them, absolutely. You guys answered correctly. The job description should be running as a theme through attracting, onboarding, training, and retaining. Having good job descriptions strengthens the organization at every level of the job cycle. And so again, it's a critical thing that you make sure that you have good and solid and accurate job descriptions. So what is a typical small business? So typically, when I come into a small business as a consultant, my sweet spot for businesses, most businesses that I'm working with are 150 employees or less. Typically, I'm finding that most of the customers that I'm working with these days, they've got anywhere from 20 to 100 employees. And many times I come in because they have a presenting problem. And you guys know this all as HR and workforce professionals, we have presenting problems and we're looking for the underlying issue. And what I'm seeing from many of these businesses is when they're making a hire, they're getting overloaded. And one day they come in and they're like, okay, we're making the budget work, we're posting this to a job board. Okay, and they post the job to a job board. They do some kind of informal interview, and that's another class for another topic because I could speak all day on interview processes. But they do an informal interview, and then they hire what they feel like is the best fit for the role. And here's the problem. Sometimes this works out. Sometimes you get lucky, right? Sometimes you put that job board out, especially when I'm working with some of my small and mid-sized businesses, they have great culture. And great culture is something that you should promote. Don't get me wrong, I think great culture is wonderful. You need to promote if you have great culture. But some of these small and mid-sized businesses are saying, we have awesome culture, come work for us. And sometimes this works out, but if they don't have clear expectations for the role, what's going to happen to that individual if they are put in a good culture, but they aren't given a specific task? What do you think is going to happen? Okay, they're going to flounder. Anything else that y'all would see in that situation?
They're gonna leave because there's no direction.
Yep, they're going to leave because there's no direction. Your folks that are most driven, your folks that are most wanting to complete and accomplish a task, they need to know the expectations for the role. I teach a little class called Situational Leadership. Any of you guys heard of Situational Leadership before? I've taught Situational Leadership since 2013. And something that is revolutionary when we teach Situational Leadership, we talk about you have to get on the same page about a task. Your leader and your follower have to have a common understanding of what is the task we are asking you to perform. The job description is simply a tool to help us get on the same page of expectations. And so very much this idea of moving forward without a clear intention in mind, especially if you don't have any job description. I've seen it more times than you would realize. Somebody comes in and you're like, okay, here's the computer and go for it, right? So having that clear job description is absolutely critical. Well, let's talk about this. What does the job description entail? So you guys, I mentioned it earlier in the talk, this idea of job descriptions run throughout the employee life cycle process. Your job description is internal. And because of that, your job ads are going to be a little bit different. You are going to use internal language whenever you're using a job description. You're going to talk about things that might be proprietary or confidential. And this is the piece where I kind of get heartburn sometimes when I see people using job ads as a job description.
Amen.
Because if you're just using your job ad as a job description, you are putting out for the world what you want everybody to know. There is no way that you are going to reveal that confidential information that folks need to know behind the scenes by saying, well, here's your job ad, that's figure out, okay? So there should be two levels. Now these should be very similar, they should be parallel to one another, okay? But they should be building upon one another. Obviously your job description is going to get into more specifics of what departments you're working with, what proprietary software you might be using, okay? Your interviews should be built on your job descriptions. I need to say this again. Your interviews should be built on your job descriptions. We're going to talk about competencies in a few minutes, but you should be doing, for the most part, behaviorally based interviews that come back to the competencies that you identify in those job descriptions. Training. I came from a training world. I cut my teeth in training. This is like where I've spent a lot of my time in my 13-year career. I have to tell you guys, the training expounds on your job description. So many times when I come into a business and they say, well, we don't have job descriptions, I know the training that you're about to have is probably not very thorough either, okay? Because this is the base and your training should be pulled off of that. Performance reviews. Guys, expectations are so important. You should be building your performance reviews based on those job descriptions that you have built. If you are doing performance reviews that are based on, just some of the how I feel, how you're doing, your dynamics, that's great and important. We need to talk about how you play in the sandbox. But we also need to talk about how you're delivering on those key performance indicators that are identified within that job description. So very, very important that you understand your job descriptions as the bedrock foundation. So I want you guys to, I did a class for the Tennessee Small Business Center and I had a lot of retail folks that joined us in this conversation about building foundational human resources. These were businesses that had employees of 10 or less. They had no HR manager. And so we talked a lot about looking at our job descriptions like inventory, right? So if you have inventory in your business, you've got to look at, if you're bringing in new inventory, we've got to make space for it. Maybe you need to move some of that inventory around. We think about competencies just like we think about inventory in a business. And so I want to challenge you guys as we're looking through these job descriptions to shift to a systematic approach. So job descriptions equal expectation management. Here's the piece that I really want to drive home. And in my introduction, we talked about, I have a psychology background. I think about everything with a psychology skew. It's a blessing and a curse. But this piece of job descriptions being expectation management is critical. People need mastery. People need to know where they stand. You can have the greatest managers in the world, and guys, I have worked with some fantastic managers over the years. I have worked with some inspirational leaders, some folks that are great at managing their team. But the biggest part of managing someone is having expectation management. We have to tell them what we expect out of them. We have to tell them what the end result that they're trying to work towards. And that is, one tool of that is this job description piece. And guys, this is gonna sound really litigious, and I'm just gonna tell you guys, I think it needs to be in writing. Now, why is that? Why do you think I think it needs to be in writing? Well, as we are seeing within the marketplace, people at all levels are turning over right now. We're seeing a lot of movement within the marketplace. So what happens if you have a great and inspirational leader that suddenly takes an opportunity, even within your organization? If you don't have great job descriptions, their team will flounder. Their team will struggle, because you need to have these outlined expectations, and it all comes back to this idea of we all need to know what's expected of us. We all need to know where the mark is. And so I am a very big believer of making sure that we get those job descriptions in writing. So I want to present to you guys this idea of an inventory approach to needs analysis. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys, and some of you guys might get out of this 30-minute session and say, well, Jessica, you just kind of showed us down the path. You didn't give us necessarily a step-by-step instructions. That's on purpose. Y'all's businesses all operate differently. I want to give you guys some general principles that I use, and I'll tell you guys, when I go in and do job analysis, when I go in and do job descriptions for a business, I do it differently depending on the business's culture, how the team works, how the team's going to use these job descriptions. So I'm going to tell you guys, even as an academic, I am not going to come with a perfect formula, but what I want to give you guys is some general principles that I use. I always do a needs analysis. You know, a lot of times businesses are surprised when I come in and do HR work with them. I start by sitting down with the CEO, CFO, who's leading the organization, and say, what's your business goals? Some of them kind of look at me and like, you're here for HR. And I'm like, no. You got to have your people to support the goals that you have for your business. And so I always start with this needs analysis. What's hurting? Where are we missing critical skills? Where are we missing these skill sets? I'm at competencies. We'll talk about competencies in a minute, what they're different, how I use that word. There are a lot of people that associate words with competencies. I'll tell you how I use that word. Targeted search and intentional screening. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. This idea of we have to start with a gap analysis. We have to start by saying, where are we right now? And realistically, we have to say, how are people operating right now? I also see a piece where I come into businesses and they say how they want to operate next year. And I'm like, no. We'll get there. We got to start with who's doing what right now. And what people don't realize is we have so much tribal knowledge, so many things that we don't have written down. And especially with our key performers that might be retiring in the next couple of years. We're seeing a lot of movement in the job market. If we don't have this tribal knowledge identified, documented, somebody gives a 2-week notice, do you think you can get everything out of that key player in two weeks? Probably not, okay? Then you're scrambling. So very important to do this needs analysis. So I want to take you guys behind the scenes. I want to take you guys through the process that I personally use, right, wrong, or indifferent. Some of you guys that have been in HR, I see some of you guys that I respect very highly in this room. I'm a little bit nervous to pull the curtain back because I'm thinking they're about to judge what I do. But I want to share with you guys what I do, just a perspective of if I come into a business and there are no job descriptions, or there are very old job descriptions that are not accurate, what process that I go through. So in the process of a job analysis, I really use 3 main tools when I'm doing a job analysis. And I start with a gap analysis. So, what do we have right now? What are we missing? Where are we going? How do we need to close that gap going forward? You guys see org chart down here? Everybody wants to start with an org chart. Oh, org charts are so fun. They're so pretty. That's an informative piece that I think is helpful. How does this organization interplay with everybody else in the organization? But I'm really starting with this gap analysis when I'm doing a job description and job analysis. And the reason is because us sitting down and doing the job analysis, we might blow this up. And so I have to be very careful in saying, all right, let's start right here, and then we might revisit this in the process, okay? The other two pieces that I really rely on are interviews and observations. Most of the time now, when I'm coming in as a consultant, I'm doing a lot of interviewing. I do observations sometimes. Observations are pretty time intensive. I would say that is a little bit better served for you guys internally as an organization. You can do some observations, but it's literally this idea of, interviewing somebody that's an incumbent in the role, talking with somebody and saying, what are you doing? And we're going to talk about some questions in a minute. Also observations, maybe even having others that work with them say, what does this person do? What do you see them doing? If we're doing something every day, it's really easy to miss some of the things that we might be individually doing. And so it's critical to realize that there are multiple methods to get a viewpoint of where somebody is within the job. So interview process, I'll go ahead and tell you guys, when I come into an organization and I write their when I'm going to write their job description, I create an interview template, just like if I were interviewing a person, right? I create an interview template. Most of the time when I'm coming into businesses, I am not super familiar with their industry, which actually is a benefit to me because I ask a lot of dumb questions. But I'll come in and spend about 30 minutes with every individual that's in a role. Now, do I think that's enough time to really get down to what they're doing? Absolutely not. We will have another process that once I write the job description, I actually send it to the incumbents. And I say, okay, what I miss? They always come up with stuff. But I actually walk through an interview process and I say, walk me through a typical day. Tell me what are things that you do sometimes, maybe quarterly, maybe annually. What outcomes or products are you responsible for? How do you interact with the customers? Are you customer facing? What are some troubleshooting things that you might have to do with them? What are some odd situations that you have to deal with? What are systems that you use to accomplish your work? And how do you work with other teams? Now, there may be a business or an industry that I dig even further down to that. There may be particular pain points with the business, and because I started with the CEO or the leader and asking about, where's the organization going, I may add questions in here based on that conversation. But it's critical to have a standardized set of questions that you are going through as you are doing these interviews. Now, this is something really important as well, and I will tell you guys, this is something, if you're thinking of ideas of, hey, Jessica, I can't interview my whole workforce. This is a great project for somebody that is new to your business. This might be a great project for an intern. This might be a great project for someone who is learning about your business because they have two things. They're an outside eye. They're not afraid to ask those dumb questions, but they also now get insight into your business as they're doing that. And so I would argue this is a great project to do if you have a good rubric. And again, I'm a strong believer of creating a rubric of the same questions that people can use to kind of write down and track that things. But this is a very good project for a junior person, okay? So go beyond the interview. I mentioned earlier observations. What's really interesting is I get the opportunity to work with a few businesses over a long period of time. And for many of them, I've started with their job description, and 3 months later, 4 months later, I'm interacting with someone in their business and they're doing something and I'm like, is that new? Did we miss that on your job description? Oh yeah, I just started, this is a new task that we got because of this new product or whatever else. And I'm like, all right, let's add that into the job description. Giving an opportunity for observations to happen, that third perspective, again, somebody that is outside of the normal scope, somebody that's not seeing that job from day to day, that third perspective is very helpful. Gap analysis to create long-term direction. Again, that org chart is where that can come in there. I really see a lot of good strategy conversations coming out of this job analysis or job description project. Really looking at where are we now? Oh wait, we have two teams that are doing the same thing. We're having somebody doing double work. We didn't realize that. This actually can save you time in the long term going through this process. So I want to show you guys this. How many of you guys have heard of Own It in this group? How many of y'all? Okay, several of y'all. well, many times I go into a small business. Now let me give you guys a caveat. This is not as good of a tool as some of the paid services that are out there. There's some really good paid services for benchmarking with job descriptions, benchmarking with pay, benchmarking with those other items. But y'all, you can't beat free, okay? And so this material is from the Department of Labor. It is based on overall employee information. It's also going to be more broad, but I want to tell you guys how I use this, because many times I'm coming into small businesses, they don't have a lot of extra cash, they can't pay for the big nice services. I actually use ONET as a free resource that we can dig down into some of these. So this is ONET, as you guys see. When I started in human resources back in 2008, this was exactly what ONET looked like. Still looks like that, okay? And this is a resource again for the Department of Labor. As you guys can see, you can browse by job family. So there are job families listed within there. I went with business and financial operations just to see, and I actually dug down into training and development specialists just because I can pick on folks in my world. But as we look at ONET, you're going to have some reported job titles that came to the Department of Labor. But here's what's really great. Here's some tasks that typically fall under this job title. And this is a good way to get folks started thinking about, okay, like what kinds of tasks would somebody with the title of a training and development specialist do? Okay. Now, if I see a company that just copies and pastes off of this, no, there's no way this is exactly what folks are doing. Okay. But it gives you a start. It gives you kind of some helpful wording. It gives you a place to begin. What's also neat is here's somebody said KSAs earlier. Here's your KSAs that are typically associated with this role. Okay. I really like starting here because so many times we say, we'll just write a job description and people go, where do I start? Okay. This gives folks at least a start within that job path of what to do. Also, fun fact, there's some pay data there. It's a little bit behind. It's based off of 2020 still. We're waiting for the 2021 data to come out. So I normally say it's a little bit lagging, but it's out there and it's free. Okay, so just a resource that I always reach out there as well. So I want to introduce one more thing really quickly. And I said I only have 25 minutes of content. I talk. I'm good at talking. Let's talk about this idea of mapping competencies. I want to make sure that I introduce one more thing, that job descriptions are a must for your business. I really want to encourage you guys to move from kind of the experience skills of what people had to the competency model, what people can do. This idea of core competencies that are required within a role. Typically when I'm working with businesses, we still have to do the task piece, we still have to do the knowledge, skills, and experiences, but I talk about, okay, what competencies do you need before somebody gets in the door? One of the best successes, and I want to talk to you guys about willing to look beyond the traditional candidate. This is being recorded, so I'm going to give you guys just a very, very high level of this particular situation because I want to be respectful of the confidentiality of this individual that I worked with. Worked with a business early this year that they were looking for a very specific job. And I worked with someone that was a pretty open-minded hiring manager. And I said, what do you need out of this person? Okay? And they said, okay, this is some of the core competencies that we need. We need somebody that's independent. We need somebody that works with ambiguity. We need somebody that has good customer service skills. And we need somebody that is detail-oriented. And I'm like, okay, I can work with that. So I wrote a job description for the team. I wrote a job ad. And then I said, okay, what specific skills and experience do you want? And she went, I don't care. As long as they got these competencies, this is what we're going to go for. Y'all, I had 100 applicants in 24 hours. I would say 30 of them were well qualified. I did interviews with probably about 18 of them, and this person probably could have hired about 5 of them and been extremely happy. Now, the end result was that this person was willing to look beyond the traditional candidate. This person was willing to look beyond the traditional things that you would require. And the person that they ended up with, on paper, did not necessarily have the traditional experience and education to get the role. Now, almost a year later, they're very happy with this hire. And so it's an example of being willing to look beyond the traditional candidate. So let's talk about what I mean when I talk about competency. A competency example that I wanted to use here is public speaking. Okay, public speaking. Let's say public speaking is one of your identified core competencies for the role. Well, this looks like content design, stage presence, communication. But where can that person gain that competency from? Well, traditional experience. If you're in a traditional role that you're getting up in front of people, yeah, you're going to have that competency of public speaking. But what about volunteer opportunities? What about non-traditional experience? Experience that, yeah, maybe it's not traditionally what we're looking at. We're not saying, yeah, this person has 3 years of training experience. Maybe they've had opportunities to volunteer and build that competency. Maybe they've had situations that they've been in that they can build that competency non-traditionally. It gets difficult because what I'm asking you guys to do as well is really think outside of the box, and that makes resume screening a little bit harder. I'll throw that out there as well. I realize that's much more time consuming. But the flip side is if you're willing to really dig into what are the pre-existing requirements for this role, what can we train versus what they have to have on day one, then you really can get down to that competency level. Job descriptions should be dynamic. I want to make sure I highlight this idea that job descriptions should not be written in stone, put on a shelf, never seen again. Now, I want to tell you guys something that some of y'all that are, with bigger organizations kind of might fall out of your chair when I say this. I typically work with smaller businesses. We have some of the legal stuff that's out there. You got to have those legal pieces of, if we have a legal challenge, we've got to have that. We really separated the functional versus the legal job description of, how do you create job descriptions that can be dynamic? Whether they are regularly reviewing it with the incumbents, regularly going over them, whether it's even if you build into your performance review every year, hey, look over your job description and make sure this is still accurate, okay? This idea of a regular review and making sure that they are up to date, they are usable, and they are accurate. So finding the right candidate. So know where your candidates are hanging out. Okay, this is really important as well. This ties into the job description piece, and I know we're going a little bit beyond job description, but I want to make sure that we talk about this piece of, as you're using job descriptions for hiring, they can inform where's your primary applicant pool. Being realistic about your budget, you guys know this, the talent market is tight right now. The budget is something that's really important to think about. Your non-traditional candidates, are you willing to look at folks, without a certain number of experience years? Are you willing to look at folks without a certain degree or a certain certification? Listen, guys, I am not knocking a college degree. I teach at MTSU, okay? I believe in a college degree for the right roles, but are you willing to explore outside options, people that you might potentially train, people that might be attracted if they're going through school at the time? That's another thing as well. Somebody that maybe has not completed their degree, but they're doing night classes or they're doing non-traditional or online courses. And again, your job description should inform your resume reviewing. Very important that you have a rubric based on that. Very important that you create that based on what you're seeing, what you're understanding within the business, okay? So that is actually all that I have. I went a little more than 30 minutes.
Perfect timing.
Does anybody have any questions? I wanted to make sure we've got till 9:45. Any questions? But also I'll open this up as well. Any best practices that you guys see? Because I'm up here to start the conversation, but I also know I might not have all the answers of what's going best for you guys. So any questions, comments, things that you guys have seen work for your business? Go ahead.
When you were talking about interviewing, one-on-one is how I interpreted that. How would that compare to group interviews?
Okay, so you're talking about if I'm one-on-one doing a job, like trying to get information for a job, that's a great idea too. You certainly can bring a group of folks together and talk through some of that. And that would be more advantageous for time as well. I typically, when I'm working in businesses, I'm typically with smaller businesses where there's generally only 1 to 2 people in a role. And so that one-to-one makes sense. But a group certainly would be very dynamic and get lots of thoughts because then you could bounce it off of each other. That's a great idea. Any other questions, comments, things that you've seen work? Go ahead.
Give you a best practice. In my organization, we have our employees sign their job description.
Ooh,
It's
that's
part of their onboarding,
Mhm.
but it also holds them accountable during performance discussions. Sometimes we can look at it as a hassle when we
Yeah.
have a lot of employees,
Yes.
but we've integrated that into our onboarding, and
Yeah.
it helps
Yeah.
with those conversations.
Yeah. Do you ever get feedback of, this is not exactly what I've learned?
Absolutely.
Oh,
That's
that's
another reason why we
great.
do it. Yes.
Very good.
Systems that, or we might have an old system in it that shouldn't be in there, so by having them do that, it definitely helps.
Thanks, Tiana. That's great.
Well, it also gives management, it puts their feet to the fire too,
Yeah.
to stay active in the process of
Yeah.
looking at that job description.
Yeah.
And keeping it live, like you said, dynamic.
Yeah,
You don't keep it on a shelf. You
Yeah.
keep it on a shelf, it's gonna get old and outdated.
it is. It is. And that's the thing too is, I think so many times we think about the legal aspect. That's the first thing that I always think of. Well, we have a legal challenge. Do we have, job descriptions? And sometimes people are afraid to change them because they're like, oh, this is the legal background. But y'all, if your job descriptions are not up to date, how well do you think that's going to play, in that situation? So I think sometimes as I'm having conversations with businesses and they say, well, we don't have time to do this, I kind of come back and say, you kind of don't want to, let this pass because it's both a legal thing, but also that idea of if you're not constantly updating, it's going to get out of date.
But I always want to make sure that my new employees, on the day of hire, when they go through orientation, they have a copy of that with them and we go over it line by line. And so they actually keep that with them. So it's a roadmap for their success in order to build their job or to be able to learn their job. Because we can't expect them to come to work from day one and be experts at their job.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
Much like what he and Tiana was saying, we have them sign off, but we also ask them to put it up as affirmations.
Oh.
So it's constantly there.
Yeah, so it's at the workstation? Okay, very cool. That's a great idea. Good. Good.
So in our organization, one of the things I ask hiring managers to do is to send me their job descriptions so I can review them before we post them. And one interesting thing I've noticed is some of our more creative managers like to come up with these trendy, eye-catching job descriptions that maybe a little less detail-oriented, but they think are going to attract these really exciting candidates. And so we've got that end of the spectrum, and then we've got, maybe our construction and engineering folks that have these very dry, baseline, very minimal job descriptions where I'm like, what else are they doing? This is 4 bullet points. Is this 40 hours a week at work? So I'm trying to extract information from them. Is there a way that you have either maybe a template built out or something that you recommend to streamline to have more a similar flow in terms of the job descriptions coming out?
I have a template. I'm happy to send it to you if
Okay.
you would give me your business card and I'll send it to you. It's very structured. I thought about putting up the template to share with all of you guys. The flip side is I also want you guys to know there is not a right way to this. I certainly can give you some ideas. I don't want to sway you in a way that may not necessarily work for your business. And that was why I intentionally didn't include that template is, I think we can so often get into this worry of what I'm doing is wrong, this is right, that kind of thing. There is some definite black and white when it comes to job descriptions. The flip side is there are quite a bit of areas of gray where things that you're working with your business. And I would encourage you, that's why, again, you might want to have, you mentioned you have some more creative folks that are trying to put some more creative things out there. You probably want to have a different job ad than you do your job description. And that's where, yes, that would definitely serve. If you're looking for a more creative type, go for it, right? Because job ads are all about good marketing. The flip side is, having something that you can even take from that and, okay, this is our standard template for what happens behind the scenes. Does that make sense? Okay.
I want to add to that because I
Yes.
think, to your point, whoever that was trying. And now we have multi-generational recruiting. I'm gonna call it recruiting.
Yeah.
Because what you would say to me would be maybe different what you need to say to somebody right out of MTSU, okay? Because I saw this with my daughter recently, going, you know, and reading online, she's like, oh my God, Mom. And she's got her master's degree, okay?
Yeah.
And then I had a young man that I interfaced with, because when I speak to groups, inevitably a parent will come up to me, my son, he's got this degree, da 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 da. So I meet this kid straight out of Tennessee Tech, engineering degree, robotics, everything he needed, could not get past the ATS, the applicant tracking systems. Could not land an interview, and I said, okay, this is just stupid. And I have worked with ATS, and I said, hang on here. So I shot his resume out, Beth shot his resume out, and all of a sudden he had more interviews than he could handle.
Yeah.
So my point is, we are missing great talent because of job descriptions, but also because of ATS systems that are sold to us as the panacea, and they're dropping candidates, or we're not looking at them, or, you know, as well as we should.
Yeah.
So really, it's incumbent on us as HR to be on our toes.
Yeah. Yeah, fair.
I was gonna ask if you have seen in your consulting, what is one of, or a few of the things that attract the talent when it comes to job descriptions and things that run people away?
I think it's dependent on the industry. Let me tell you about the success story with the organization that had just crazy numbers of applicants that I saw. You know, we focused on what were the key deliverables for that role. We focused on the kinds of things that individual that we hired could contribute. And in nowhere within that role did you see, you know, minimum experience, minimum degree, that kind of thing. We focus very much on, you know, and again, if you have some minimum things that's a deal breaker, please put that on your job ad. You know, you don't want people applying that are not going to meet the minimum threshold. But that idea of how are you going to contribute to the success of the organization, that tends to be what I'm seeing is a good job ad as far as attracting people. So, any other questions? Comments? You guys have had great comments. I said before, I am just the speaker. I also feel like I can learn from so many of you guys on the best way to do things. I am in the process, but the unique thing is you guys have to figure out what works for your team. You know, things like, I love that idea, having folks sign off on it when they're done at training. I may steal that, thank you. But have that idea of somebody signing off, that's a good point to checking that job description at that point.
Another thing I could say, speaking to what you just said about we have to be able to relate to people because they get stuck in the applicant tracking system and we're not looking at them. What we've been doing lately is we actually invite them for a tour to say, come see the facility and the job versus an interview. Because sometimes the interview, they get, we got an interview.
Yeah.
So we kind of say, well, we want to invite you
Yes.
to come see our facility and see the positions that you're interested in. That kind of gives them a visibility and they can understand it a little bit better than looking at the job description. So it's like, oh, I can do this. Oh, no, I don't want to do this.
Absolutely. And that was at the beginning, creating realistic job descriptions. You know, I feel the crunch right now. We're having a hard time finding talent in many of our industries. What we then become tempted to do is to create these very unrealistic ads and expectations. Because I get it, we want to market, we want to get people in the door. But that's not doing us any favors if it's not realistic, because then we see a turnover problem where we've trained people for 2 to 3 months and then we lose them. And that's even more painful than having to do more interviewing or keeping the job out there for a little bit longer to find the right candidate. And again, I feel that. I walk that line every day of how attractive do we make this sound without it, you know, being too unrealistic, right? So that's something I would encourage you guys, if you're seeing some of that, and that's a great point as well, some of that indicator, if you're seeing some of that turnover that's happening through the training period or immediately after the training period, there may be lots of factors. But I would go back and look at both that job description and that job ad that you're using and say, okay, are we being realistic? Because as tempting as it is to get more people in the door, it's more painful to spend time training them for a couple months and then to lose them. Anything else? All right, I'll let you guys, anything else for the room?
No, that is it. The email's up there. If you have any questions, feel free to email.
Yeah, it's jessica@jpraterconsulting.com. If you guys have cards, Kelly, I broke the rule. I broke the fundamental rule. I don't even have my business cards with me. If you give me your business card, I would love to talk with you more. But otherwise, you guys have great sessions today. Thank you guys for coming.